Have you ever wondered why an anxiety attack chooses that exact moment to strike? Why, just when you need to be most present, your mind turns into a storm of terror that no one around you can see or understand? The truth is that every anxiety attack carries secret messages from your psyche, deep pains that you've buried so far down that even you no longer recognize them. And today, you will discover the 5 secret pains that people with anxiety attacks carry in silence, invisible to the outside world, but devastating on the inside. Carl Jung, the pioneer of depth psychology, revolutionized our understanding of the human mind by revealing that our most disturbing symptoms are actually messages from the psyche trying to show us rejected parts of ourselves. He discovered that extreme anxiety is not just a chemical dysfunction, but a sign that our psychological shadow, those parts of ourselves we consider unacceptable, is fighting to be integrated. While you experience these attacks as random invasions of terror, your psyche is actually screaming about emotional wounds that were never healed. Every racing heartbeat, every shortness of breath, every feeling of impending doom is the desperate language of the unconscious, trying to show you what you need to see to become whole again. Most people who suffer from anxiety attacks focus only on the physical symptoms. They take medication to control the crises, learn breathing techniques, and avoid situations that might trigger new episodes. But few understand that behind every attack, there is a wounded child inside you, screaming for attention and care. This child carries pains you don't even remember feeling, traumas your conscious mind considers resolved, but that your deep psyche never managed to fully process. And now, years later, these pains emerge disguised as panic attacks, forcing you to finally look at what was left behind. What you are about to discover today will forever change the way you see your anxiety attacks. Because when you understand the secret pains they carry, you stop being a victim of the crises and become the healer of your own psyche. These 5 pains are universal among people who experience anxiety attacks, but each one manifests uniquely in every individual. They are wounds that shape how you relate to the world, to others, and especially to yourself. They are the invisible roots that feed the tree of terror growing inside you. Prepare to look into the deepest mirror of your soul. Because recognizing these pains is the first step to transforming your anxiety attacks from destructive enemies into masters of your own psychological evolution. But before we reveal these 5 secret pains, you need to be prepared for a journey that goes beyond superficial symptoms. A journey that will lead you to encounter the most vulnerable and rejected parts of who you are. Are you ready to discover what your anxiety attacks are really trying to tell you? Stop for a moment and be brutally honest with yourself. How many times have you felt like you were dying, but had to pretend everything was fine because no one around you could see your inner storm? How many times have you canceled important plans because you knew an attack could erupt at any moment, leaving you exposed and vulnerable in front of others? How many times have you hidden in the bathroom, in your car, or anywhere you could have your crisis in private, away from judging eyes? If you're reading this, you probably know this dual reality intimately. On the outside, you develop increasingly sophisticated masks to hide the internal chaos. On the inside, you live on an emotional roller coaster where you never know when the next attack will steal your peace. Notice how you've become an expert at hiding your vulnerability. Notice how you've developed an internal radar that constantly scans the environment for invisible threats. Notice how you live in a permanent state of high alert, always prepared for the next storm. But what you don't realize is that this constant vigilance is actually your psyche trying to protect very old wounds. Every anxiety attack is an alarm triggered by pains you've buried so deeply that you can no longer even name them. You develop secret rituals to control the uncontrollable. You avoid certain places, certain people, certain situations. You carry medication like protective talismans. You plan escape routes before even entering any environment. All because you know that beneath the seemingly calm surface, there is a volcano ready to erupt. Recognize the profound loneliness this creates. Because how do you explain to someone who has never had an anxiety attack what it feels like to have your own body turn into a battlefield? How do you make them understand that it's not drama? It's not an overreaction. It's not a lack of emotional control. While you fight to maintain a facade of normality, inside you carry the weight of pains no one sees. Pains that have accumulated over the years, layer upon layer, until your psyche can no longer contain the pressure. Do you recognize this description? It's because you are living the consequences of having rejected fundamental parts of yourself. Parts that contained vulnerabilities, fears and needs you learned to consider unacceptable. And now your psychological shadow uses anxiety attacks as a language to force you to pay attention to these banished parts. Each crisis is a desperate cry asking you to stop running and finally look at what needs to be healed. Today, you will discover exactly what these secret pains are, not so you identify with them even more, but so you understand that recognizing them is the first step to transforming them. Because when you understand the language of your anxiety attacks, you stop being their hostage and become the translator of your own healing. Are you ready to decipher these messages your psyche has been sending through the crises? To understand the secret pains that fuel your anxiety attacks, you first need to understand a fundamental truth that Jung discovered. Our psyche possesses its own wisdom, and it always finds ways to communicate what our conscious mind refuses to see. Anxiety attacks are not failures of your nervous system. They are eruptions from your psychological shadow, that region of the psyche where you have filed away all the experiences, emotions, and parts of yourself you deemed too dangerous to integrate consciously. Imagine your psyche as a house with many rooms. In the living room, you keep only the aspects of yourself that you consider acceptable and safe. But there's a basement where you've locked away everything you once judged as weakness, shame, fear, or inadequacy. Over time, this basement gets crowded and the pressure builds. An anxiety attack is like the doors of that basement being thrown open all at once, dumping the entire repressed emotional load you tried to keep hidden into your consciousness. That's why the feeling is so overwhelming. It's not just the fear of the present moment. It's the accumulation of decades of unprocessed pain. Your psyche has developed the attack as a last-ditch strategy to force you to pay attention to these rejected parts. When breathing techniques, medication, and avoidance fail, it's because you're only treating the symptoms without understanding the message they carry. Jung discovered that every psychological symptom serves a purpose. It forces us to stop, to look inward, to confront aspects of ourselves we would rather keep in the shadows. The anxiety attack is the most dramatic way your psyche has found to say, stop pretending everything is okay. Stop rejecting fundamental parts of who you are. Each crisis contains precious information about wounds that have shaped your personality in ways you can't even imagine. Traumas of abandonment that created a constant vigilance against rejection. Experiences of humiliation that developed a visceral fear of being seen and judged. Moments of helplessness that generated a compulsive need to control every variable in life. These old pains function like unconscious programs that trigger alarms in situations your rational mind considers safe, but that your deep psyche recognizes as threats based on unhealed memories. The paradox is that the more you try to avoid these pains, the more power you give them. The more you run from the triggers that could set off an attack, the more you confirm to your psyche that there is something genuinely dangerous to be avoided. The cure isn't in controlling the attacks, but in understanding and integrating the pains they reveal. When you stop seeing the attacks as enemies and start seeing them as messengers, everything changes. You stop being a victim of the crises and become an archaeologist of your own soul. Now, you are ready to discover exactly what these 5 universal secret pains are that hide behind anxiety attacks. Pains that shape your perception of reality and fuel the cycle of terror you know so well. These pains are like ghosts from the past that haunt your present until they are finally acknowledged and integrated. The first secret: pain, the terror of emotional abandonment. Have you ever noticed how your anxiety attacks often appear when you most need to connect with other people? This is no coincidence. Behind every crisis, there is a wounded child inside you who once learned that being vulnerable is too dangerous. This child lived through moments where their vulnerability was rejected, ignored, or punished. Maybe when you cried and were called dramatic. Maybe when you asked for help and were called weak. Maybe when you expressed fear and were ridiculed. These experiences created an unconscious program. Showing vulnerability leads to abandonment. Now, whenever a social situation requires you to expose yourself emotionally, your psyche triggers all the alarms. The anxiety attack becomes a desperate strategy to avoid repeating that original pain of abandonment. The second secret pain: the shame of existing imperfectly. This is perhaps the deepest of all pains. Inside you, there is a cruel voice that constantly whispers that you are not enough as you are, that you need to be perfect to deserve love, acceptance, and belonging. You have developed a toxic relationship with your own humanity. Every imperfection is seen as evidence that you are fundamentally flawed. Every mistake is interpreted as confirmation that you don't deserve to be here. Your anxiety attacks erupt precisely when this primitive shame is activated. The cruel paradox is that the more you try to be perfect to avoid rejection, the further you move away from your authenticity. And the further you move from who you really are, the more your psyche protests through increasingly intense attacks. The third secret pain: the visceral fear of losing control. You may not realize it, but you've developed a compulsive need to control every variable in your life because sometime in the past you lived through an experience of total helplessness that your psyche could never fully process. It could have been an obvious trauma or something seemingly small that was devastating to a child. A moment where you felt completely defenseless and promised yourself you would never let something like that happen again. Now you live in a state of constant vigilance, trying to predict and control everything that could go wrong. But life is inherently unpredictable, and when something slips out of your control, your psyche goes into a total panic. The anxiety attack is the response to that unbearable feeling of being at the mercy of forces you cannot command. The irony is that the more you try to control everything, the more you become a slave to your own fear. And the more you're a slave to fear, the more your life narrows until you're living in an invisible prison built by your own need for security. Are you recognizing these pains in yourself? Are you seeing how they operate in silence, shaping your reactions and triggering your attacks at your most vulnerable moments? These are just the first 3 secret pains, and if you already see yourself in them, get ready. The next 2 are even deeper and may finally explain why your anxiety attacks persist even when you're doing everything right on the surface. Stay with me, because a complete understanding of these 5 pains is the key to transforming your crises of terror into portals of healing. The 4th secret pain: disguised existential loneliness. This is the most difficult pain to recognize because it hides behind relationships, work, and constant activity. Inside you, there is a deep void, a feeling that you are fundamentally alone in the universe, even when surrounded by people. This loneliness isn't about being physically alone. It's about the terrifying feeling that no one truly sees you, understands you, or accepts you in your entirety. You can be at a crowded party and feel as if you're in a transparent bubble, watching life happen without being able to truly participate. Your anxiety attacks often erupt in social situations because your psyche recognizes the impossibility of authentic connection when you're wearing masks to protect yourself. The more you hide behind false personas, the deeper this existential loneliness becomes. The tragedy is that you created these masks precisely to avoid rejection, but they have become the very prisons that prevent the real connection your soul craves. And when you realize, even unconsciously, that you're living a life of superficial relationships, your psyche screams through an anxiety attack. The fifth secret pain, the terror of your own emotional death. This is the most primitive and frightening pain of all. Hidden in the deepest layers of your psyche is the fear not just of physical death, but of emotional death. The terror that your most essential and authentic parts are slowly dying while you live a life that isn't truly yours. You developed such a fear of being rejected for who you really are that you began to reject yourself first. You buried your deepest dreams, your true passions, your most honest opinions, your most intense feelings, all in the name of acceptance and security. But your soul refuses to die in silence. Anxiety attacks are the desperate screams of your essence trying to resurrect itself before it's too late. Each crisis is your psyche saying, "Stop killing who you really are to please others." The fear of emotional death is so terrifying because, on some deep level, you recognize it's already happening. You look in the mirror and no longer recognize who you are. You live a life that is safe, but empty. Accepted, but inauthentic. Your attacks erupt in moments when this realization becomes impossible to ignore. When your soul can no longer pretend it's satisfied with the superficial existence you've built to protect yourself. The cruel irony is that you developed anxiety trying to avoid rejection, but you ended up rejecting yourself so completely that your own psyche has rebelled against you. These 5 secret pains operate together, creating a perfect storm of terror that manifests through your anxiety attacks. Emotional abandonment fuels the shame of existing imperfectly. Shame intensifies the need for control. Compulsive control generates more loneliness, and loneliness awakens the terror of emotional death. It's a devastating, self-perpetuating cycle, creating increasingly intense attacks until you finally stop and face these pains head-on. But recognizing them isn't enough. You need to learn how to integrate them, to heal them, to transform them from enemies into allies of your evolution. And that's exactly what you're going to learn now. Prepare to discover how to turn these 5 secret pains into portals for healing and growth. Now that you recognize the 5 secret pains fueling your anxiety attacks, it's time for real transformation. Because knowledge without application is just intellectual curiosity. Healing happens when you become the active healer of these old wounds. The first step is to stop seeing your attacks as enemies to be destroyed and start seeing them as messengers bringing precious information about parts of you that need healing. The next time you feel the first signs of an attack approaching, instead of panicking, take a deep breath and ask, which of these 5 pains is being activated right now? For the pain of emotional abandonment, practice revealing small vulnerabilities in safe relationships. Start by sharing minor fears, daily insecurities, moments of imperfection. Notice that showing your human side doesn't lead to abandonment, but to deeper connection. For the shame of existing imperfectly, develop a daily practice of self-compassion. When the inner critic begins its attacks, respond as you would to a dear friend going through the same struggle. Your imperfections are not flaws to be hidden, but characteristics that make you human and relatable. For the terror of losing control, intentionally practice small acts of surrender. Let others choose the restaurant. Don't plan every minute of your weekend. Allow yourself to be surprised by life. Discover that you can survive and even thrive without controlling every variable. For disguised existential loneliness, commit to progressive authenticity. Stop wearing social masks to please others. Express your real opinions, even when they're controversial. Let people see you as you really are, not as you think you should be. For the terror of emotional death, reconnect with your buried passions. Ask yourself, what dreams did I abandon in the name of security? What parts of myself did I sacrifice to be accepted? Start small, but start. Your soul is waiting to be resurrected. The most powerful technique is what I call anxiety attack shadow work. During or right after an anxiety attack, instead of just trying to control the symptoms, sit in silence and dialogue with the part of you that is panicking. Ask gently, "What pain are you trying to show me? When was the first time I felt this? What part of me needs healing? What message do you have for me?" Listen without judgment. That scared part of you has important wisdom to offer. Remember, you are not trying to eliminate these pains, but to integrate them. They are part of your story and carry valuable information about your deepest needs. When you stop fighting them and start welcoming them with curiosity and compassion, they transform from tyrants into teachers. This process doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey of reconciliation with parts of yourself that you rejected long ago. But every step in this direction diminishes the power these pains have over you and reduces the frequency and intensity of your attacks. Are you ready to become the healer of your own wounds? To transform your anxiety attacks from destructive invaders into guides for your deepest healing? The journey begins now, with the courage to look within and embrace all parts of who you are. You are no longer the same person who started reading this text. You now possess the map of the 5 secret pains that shape your anxiety attacks. You see through the curtain of physical symptoms and recognize the deep messages your psyche is trying to communicate. This awareness is irreversible. You can no longer pretend your attacks are just random chemical glitches. You know now that they are eruptions of old wounds asking to be healed. You are now the decoder of your own soul's language. You are the compassionate observer of your deepest pains. You are no longer the helpless victim of panic attacks, but the conscious healer of the wounds that generate them. You now hold the keys to transforming every crisis into an opportunity for integration and healing. The journey that opens before you is not about completely eliminating anxiety attacks, but about transforming your relationship with them. About using each episode as an invitation to dive deeper into understanding and healing your wounded parts. Each time you apply the integration practices you've learned, you will be stitching back together pieces of your soul that were fragmented over the years. You will be rebuilding the psychological integrity that is your birthright. Remember, courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to look fear in the face and discover the hidden treasures it carries. Your anxiety attacks are disguised portals to regions of your psyche that contain precious aspects of who you really are. You are now equipped with the ancient wisdom of Jung applied to your modern reality. You understand that psychological symptoms are always the psyche's attempts to guide us toward wholeness. You are the alchemist of your own transformation. This journey will continue to unfold, layer by layer, always revealing new aspects of your pains and new possibilities for healing. Every attack you face with this new awareness will be less devastating and more revealing. Now, I need to know, which of the 5 secret pains touched your soul the most? Comment which wound you recognize most clearly in yourself and how it has been shaping your anxiety attacks. Like this video if you felt the courage to look at your deepest wounds without judgment, but with compassion. If you recognized that your attacks are not your enemies, but messengers of your healing. Subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of integration and discovery. To learn more tools for transforming your pains into wisdom, your fears into courage, and your attacks into opportunities for healing. True healing begins when you stop running from yourself and embrace every part of your humanity, including the ones that scare you the most. Allow yourself to be whole. Allow yourself to be real. Allow yourself to be healed. The journey back home to yourself has begun.